Welcome. My name is Kyle Thomas. I am joined by my colleague Alejandro Krasno. We are glad to be giving you a demo or tutorial, if you will, of the Kansas release functionality that is going to go into production this weekend. In other words, we're launching the next release of SES over the weekend, and you will see it if you're a user of the system starting on Monday, May 11th. And if you haven't caught on to this yet, I just want to take a minute to reiterate that the naming of these releases is done on a state name only to be different and kind of fun. We're trying to make the state examination system feel like your system, and we thought by labeling our releases with a state name would help make that point. So this release is the Kansas release. The next one in line is the New Hampshire release, and after that we're up to the Connecticut release. And so we're not doing anything alphabetically. We're just sorted the states in a random order, and we'll be labeling releases according to your state names as we go forward. So we hope you enjoyed today's tutorial. We will have some time at the end for some questions, I believe, and we'll probably hold questions until then. But if something does come up, something pressing that you want to hear more about in the moment, feel free to ask, and we should have time for that. So let's jump in. So what's included in the Kansas release? Well, it follows on the Vermont release, which was a major release for us. The Kansas release is slightly smaller, but we still have a number of enhancements and features, most of which came from end user feedback of the many users who are already in the system. A little more detail, we have 12 company-facing functions that made the Kansas release. We have 25 new or improved agency-facing functions, and that's what we're going to demo mostly today. And then 8 kind of general overall enhancements that benefit really all the users, whether it's an agency, company, or support user in the system. Just to mention, you'll hear me say this a few times, all the release notes for our releases can be found on the csbs.org website. They're in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. You can see the easy-to-remember website is csbs.org/about-SES. And you'll see many links on that website, one of which will take you to the release notes, as well as these recordings. So if you ever want to go back and look at these recordings of these tutorials, give us a few days, and we always post the recordings up there. The most recent one is the Vermont release. That's already out on the website, and you can view that at any time. So the demo and discussion topics for today that we want to show you are some changes we made to the closeout form in SES. We've opened that up now to all staff users. We've also made it easier, or I should say possible, to add another business type to the exam scope after the scope has been complete. We've made a number of enhancements to the procedures process. So we got a lot of feedback, and we'll get into this in a minute, about procedures and the ability for examiners to complete them, reviewers to review them, and to add findings to procedures as examiners are working through them. So we made a lot of changes in this release relevant to the completion of procedures. We've added some usability features in the library. Most noteworthy is the keyword search. We've added or implemented a data and document retention policy and information about that policy on the summary tab of each supervisory activity. We've beefed up the bulk download extract. That is a function in SES that was probably not working sufficiently before this, but we've increased the capacity of that up to 50 gigabytes. So we'll give a little more discussion on that when we hit those slides. And then last but not least, we have a system administrator communication tool. Basically, we now have the ability to put a banner on the front page or the home page of SES accounts to give information about upcoming releases, system policy changes, hours of operation changes, any system outages that might be planned, or fun facts about what's going on with SES over at CSBS. I put this slide in here because I wanted to reiterate for everybody that SES feedback follows a process of getting from you as the user of the system into the application. And I wanted to raise this because most of the features in this release, in the Kansas release, are coming from feedback that we got from end users right after the pilot and the first few agencies that ran exams through the system. So this is just an advertisement or a plea for you to, as you get into the system and start using it, give us your ideas, give us your feedback, and this is the process that we follow to getting them into the application. So the first thing there, the little bullhorn, represents you giving us feedback. So speak up. If you have feedback about this, let us know. Then we listen to that. Me, Alejandra, Lindsay Schmidt on the business services team, or if you contact the call center, they will carry that feedback from you to us. We will then, under the little microscope, take a look at it and see what your feedback is. We may have to call you and get some follow-up items or questions answered, but we're going to analyze your feedback and we're going to bring it to our development team and talk to them about it and see how we can make an improvement to the system. If it looks like it's doable, we will then go into construction with it. We will bring it to the development team for construction. They will build it. That's a little building block brick wall thing there. And then last but not least, we will ship it to you in the next release. And that's really what this release is all about. The Kansas release, like I said, is probably 80% adjustments to the process based on direct user feedback. And we want to make it feel like the feedback is coming to you on a timely basis, that we're being responsive in this development process, and really kind of holding true to the Agile approach. So now, with that said, let's jump into our first new feature. A lot of these, we're going to give you the problem statement, tell you what was not working well in the previous version, and then tell you what we did to fix it. This one relates to the closeout form. So to set the stage a little bit, at the end of a supervisory activity, there's a closeout form. So at the end of an exam, one of the final things that the examiner or the user needs to fill out is a form where they can put in different key data points. Many of them are optional. Ratings, those are certainly optional. They can input information about consumer refunds and other kind of close-up, wrap-up type data points related to that exam or investigation. In the previous version of SES, this was limited to the EIC only. And we heard feedback from users that, look, sometimes the EIC finishes their exam, they write the report, and someone in the office handles the closing out of that record. Someone else tracks the follow-up items and does all that kind of closeout work, and the EIC doesn't always come back to finish that. So they asked for this functionality to be expanded and allow the different role to do that. And the role that we opened this up to is the agency staff user role. So the change here is to open this form, the closeout form, up to agency staff users. And those users do not have to be a participant on the exam. So any staff user who takes over after the EIC completes the report has now the ability to enter the closeout information. So this was a fairly simple change, just expanding this feature into another user category, and I think it's pretty straightforward. The next feedback item we addressed in this release is giving users the ability to update the scope by adding a business type. So the problem statement here was that sometimes after the initial scope was done, meaning the examiners went through and said this is, for example, a mortgage origination exam, and added the mortgage origination business activities to the exam, they got onto the exam and then discovered, you know what, we need to do a mortgage servicing review because this company is involved in servicing as well, and we did not realize that when we set this exam up. And in the previous version of SES, there was no way to update the scope with the business type. There was no way to add a new business type, essentially, to the scope. Well, now there is. So the simple enhancement here is providing EICs the ability to go backwards and update the scope by adding an additional business type. So rather than demo this, because I think it's very straightforward, we just included a screenshot here of what this looks like. You'll see at the top, the existing business type in this screenshot was money service business, and then the business activities that were part of this exam. Business activities, by the way, can be added at any point. These have always been able to be modified. But we never had the ability to add additional business types. So you'll see new business types there on the screen underneath the existing. And that drop-down menu becomes available to the EIC. They can then select a new business type and then add relevant business activities and then save it, and that now is the new scope of this supervisory activity. So again, a fairly simple change. I think it provides a lot more flexibility to users, especially if you get into an exam and realize midway through an exam that you've got some additional scope that you need to cover by adding a new business type. So those are the first two major changes. The third one, and this is going to be a demo, so this is we're going to spend quite a bit of time now on the next few screens here, relates to procedures. So I'll spend a minute and set the stage. What we heard from feedback about our procedures in the previous versions of SES was that the improvements that came in the Vermont release were certainly appreciated, but we need some more improvements in order for this to work well. And we heard this feedback in particular from money service business examiners, because they have kind of a unique way of assigning out procedures to their exam team, especially when they're working on a multi-state basis. They've got a really efficient review process that they follow, and that wasn't very easy to do in SES. And they also wanted the ability to add findings right on the procedures screen. So those are really the key enhancements that we made in relation to that feedback. I think as we've evaluated this feedback and worked with and had conversations with examiners from other disciplines, we found that these features should not only benefit money service business examiners, but every examiner or exam team. And I think in particular exam teams that are multi-state. So that's kind of the backstory. Here are the changes that we've made. And let me jump into the training environment and give you a demo of how this works. I'm going to begin by demonstrating how you can use SES now to make assignments for procedures on a group basis. So again, let me get signed in as the Vermont examiner number 1. And as this is signing in, I'll kind of set the stage again. Set my terms of use here. And again, this is my examiner homepage. This should look familiar to you by now. You've seen this in the previous releases. No major changes to the homepage here, pretty minimal or pretty similar to the Vermont release. But what, again, I'm going to demo at this point is how an examiner who's EIC might more efficiently make assignments to procedures, perhaps in the setting up of the exam process. I brought an exam in, or set an exam up in the system last night in preparation for this demo, and it's exam number 674, Next Level Money Transfers. So I'm the EIC of this exam. I'm going to click on that. It brings me to the exam record. Again, this should look very familiar to what you're used to seeing in the system. I'd like to show you now the more efficient way that we've made in SES to assign out procedures. So if you recall, procedures get added to an exam once the scope is complete and the exam is moved to in-flight status. So this exam, you can see, is resting in the in-flight status. And once an exam moves into that status, that's when procedures get pulled onto the record, so to speak. And if you recall from previous tutorials, the in-flight status is a self-selection that the EIC can make. So that the point at which an exam enters the in-flight status really is determined by the EIC. So let's go to the examination tab, which is where we know our procedures live. This is the landing page for the examination tab. And the first thing you'll see is that review summary, which gives you kind of a roll-up of all the areas for review in this exam. This happens to be a money service business exam. And here are all the areas for review part of this exam. Any completed procedures, you can see that we're just getting started with this exam now because no procedures have been started. And then also any findings and some other relevant information. But again, what I wanted to demo here was how to make these assignments. So if you go into the bulk assign procedures function at the top, the EIC has this function. You can click bulk assign procedures. This part of the process works again by area for review. And so if you pull up an area for review, let's say agent review and authorized delegates, the change we've made is to allow you to make these assignments by grabbing a certain number of procedures and then assigning them to an individual to work them. So that was kind of the use case, and that was the feedback that we had heard was prior, you had to open a procedure, assign it to someone. Open another procedure, assign it to another person. Open that third procedure, assign it to someone. And it was very tedious to make these assignments. Well, we had also the ability to make assignments based on the area for review. But the feedback that we got was we don't always assign procedures at the individual level, and we don't always assign procedures at the AFR level, the area for review level. We assign procedures somewhere in the middle. And that somewhere in the middle is based on our groupings and our categories of procedures in our world. And so what we've done is we built this table, which allows anyone to sort it based on the different fields here. And you can then begin grabbing procedures to assign out to the individual. So what I just did, because these are sorted by this column, I've decided that examiner number 2 in Vermont for this exam is going to be doing the agent file review procedures. So those 4 are going to go, and I'm going to assign those to Vermont examiner 2. And then I can assign those 4 procedures and be done with this, or I can assign those 4 procedures and begin assigning more. Let's assign some more. Go back to agent review. And one of the things that this does, this grid, allows you, the grid by default only pulls up procedures that are unassigned at this point. But if you want to see both procedures that have been assigned and unassigned, you can show them both. So you can see the 4 that we just assigned come back into the grid. And if you say yes, then the table only shows those that have been unassigned. So as I mentioned, this table is sortable. So you can sort it by area for review if you want, but I think most of the time it'll be most useful to sort it by the procedure. And what we're going to do to help, in particular the money transmitter folks, is to label these procedures with some labeling conventions that help them sort and group them together so they can make those assignments a lot easier. You can see it's already pretty easy now because all the agent policies and procedures are grouped together because that's the way this procedure starts out in the text. So I'm going to make these assignments to Vermont Examiner 3. And I'm going to do this one more time just so you can kind of follow along. Maybe hop to another category, and maybe we'll just take all of these procedures and we'll assign them to me. So really the name of the game here is selecting the procedures that you want, making the assignment, and clicking assign. The last thing I wanted to show is that there is the ability to add columns to this grid. At the bottom, there's a Show Columns button. And this allows you to choose additional columns that might be helpful in your assignment. So the most obvious one here is agency. If this was a multi-state exam, then it would be very helpful to be assigning out agency-specific procedures to the agency's examiners who are actually likely to be working those. You'll see that column just got added here and it says standard. Standard refers to the fact that these procedures did not come from a particular agency, they came from the system itself. But if you're working a multi-state exam and a particular agency had their own procedures in the system, then what you'd be able to do is see which agency they came from, click on those, and in the drop-down here, select the examiner from that agency, and then make those assignments. So I'm going to make these assignments, make these, and now I've completed that action. And on this home screen here, you should see those procedures assignments have now been made. So that was the more streamlined process we have of making assignments. Again, you can access that feature by clicking the bulk assign procedures. We did not take away the exam plan method of assigning. So there's kind of 2 concepts there, and without getting too much into training, I bring this up because I want to make sure the distinction is clear. In the exam plan is where the EAC lays out who's going to be working the AFRs, who's responsible, who's additionally contributing to these AFRs, but the bulk assignment is at the individual procedure level. You can do them in bulk, but they actually get assigned to an individual if you don't want to take an entire AFR category, for example, and assign it to someone. So it's really 2 ways of going about the assignment process. You can do it from the exam plan and update the plan, or you can do it from the exam plan and use this bulk assignment procedures feature, which you can also access from the exam tab that I showed earlier. I happen to think it makes most sense to access it from the exam tab since that's where you go to look at your procedures anyway. And just to show you again, the procedures tab here, the assignments that we made, you can see will be reflected if I sort this grid by the assignee. You can see now Vermont Examiner 1 is showing up in the various procedures that I've assigned to that individual. So that's really the streamlined procedures assignment process. We hope that this kind of splits the difference between assigning it was kind of a Goldilocks problem is what we found, was that assigning out by the AFR level was too much. Many examiners said, I don't always assign every procedure at the AFR level to one person. And then assigning at the individual procedure level 1 by 1 was too little, it was too tedious. So this bulk assignment process, we hope, is kind of a just right, and allows you to group procedures that make sense to go to one person, grab them, and assign them at one click to one individual. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next topic, and it's still related to procedures, but it's really getting to a very different concern that we heard, and I think this will be a great feature for examiners of every stripe, whether you're a money transmitter examiner, whether you're a mortgage examiner, or a consumer finance examiner. But to do that, I need to sign out and sign in as a reviewer, because the problem statement here was that it was difficult as a reviewer to go down a list of the procedures that my examiners had completed and see what their observations, their comments, their findings were, what have you. In other words, the feedback we got was, in the old version of SES, you had to open each procedure, read what the examiner wrote, and then go to the next one. And they weren't always ordered in a way that made reviewing those comments very logical, and just flipping procedure by procedure was kind of a tedious business anyway, that you wanted them presented in more of a list. So to do that, I've signed back in now as Vermont staff user, because I am a reviewer role on exam number 553, Gateway Financial. So let me open up 553, and the use case here is that I want to see how my examiners are doing on this exam, and in particular, I want to take a look at their procedures and see what kind of comments they are putting in and see how they're coming along with the completion of their procedures. So I open exam number 553, I hop on over to the examination tab, and just like we saw on the previous screens, this first page is really a roll-up and a summary of where the exam is at. You can see the completion percentage. That's a handy feature. So you can see that in the agent review and authorized delegates workflow, our area for review, we're at 42% complete, and we've identified one finding. The rest of these are sitting at 0, which means we've obviously got a lot of work to do. But that's not the main point here. The point here is that we implemented what we're calling a review mode to give reviewers a better glimpse about what procedures are generating observations and what those observations are. So if I click on the Procedures tab, I'm brought here. You can see there's a couple indicators at the top. We've got 222 total procedures related to this exam. 2% of them are marked as done. So as you may conclude, we've got a long way to go here. But then we've added this review mode button, or this review mode toggle. And this review mode changes the view of this grid and brings in observations. So now these procedures that are done are grouped to the top by default. You can see the green check mark indicates these are done. And we've got the observations in that the examiners wrote as they were going through. So for this first one, let's take training was a procedure. Have all agents received adequate BSA AML training? The examiner wrote no. Added a finding related to this issue. We observed that fewer than 50% of agents received adequate BSA training. So there's an observation and a quick and easy way to look at it. Just another thing to point out here, we added this attachment column in here as well, so that as a reviewer, you can quickly tell if the examiner added an attachment. Now, if you want more details about that attachment, you open up the procedure itself, and you can see the full procedure, the text that they had to do, their full observations, and then you can also see the documents that they uploaded in support of this procedure. Ignore the document name there. This was just a dummy document that I uploaded for these purposes. But if you were curious about what the examiner put on here, you could preview or download this document. I'm going to go back to all procedures. And again, it bumps me back to this previous view that I was at with the review mode still enacted and any sorts, filters, or what have you still in place on this grid. So it's easy to kind of hop back and forth. If you dive into a procedure, you can come right back to this screen and you can pick up right where you left off. Now, if you're wondering why the rest of these don't have any observations in them, it's because they're not done. You can see that these are no green check mark, which means these are not done. So there's a long ways to go on this exam. The last thing I want to point out on this is, again, this show columns picker. If you're not happy with this review mode because it's missing a column here, you may be able to add it by clicking this Show Columns. A few more columns are able to be added, such as business activities, core, non-core, what agency it's from, and whether it was worked or not. Also, you can add the IDs back. We removed those by default because when we were working with a group of money transmitter examiners, they said, for review purposes, these are really the fields that we need to see in order to quickly make a review assessment about the procedures that are getting done. So we removed the other fields, but gave you the ability at the bottom of the screen to add them back if they're relevant to your particular use case of that day. So that's the review mode. And again, to turn it off, it's pretty straightforward. You just toggle it and the review mode goes off. It just so happens that all users have that feature. So if you find other users other than the reviewer want to flip open that mode because it's a handier way for them to complete a task, they can do that. We did not limit the review mode to just reviewers in the exam. The next thing I'm going to demo here is I'm going to sign back out of this as sign back into this as Examiner 1 and show you the final piece of functionality we added to the review process. So I'm getting back in as Vermont Examiner 1. I'm going to go back to that exam number 553, the one that we have lots of work to do. And the feedback that we got was sometimes when you're working a procedure, you find something wrong and you want to add a finding right then and there. The way SES was working before is that you had to jump out and go into a separate area to add a finding. Now we give you the ability to actually add a finding right as you're working a procedure. I'm going to demonstrate how that's possible by opening up an area for review with a number of procedures. This is the area for review screen. This should look familiar to you at this point. We've got the information request associated to this area for review, and then the procedures below it. We've got some of these procedures that are completed. Some of them are not. So I'm going to click Work Procedures. If you remember from the Vermont release, the Work Procedures functionality was added in response to feedback that it was somewhat tedious to be working procedures, especially when you go one by one. So we solved that by popping open these procedures in a new tab, giving you the ability to select a procedure that you want to work, and then click Work Procedure. So this is an agent review and authorized delegates procedure. The procedure is, does the licensee have a program, and does it appear adequate? Is it risk-based, and so on? I'm going to say it is not adequate. Finding added. And now I'm going to show you how to go about actually adding a finding from this procedure. So that was the feedback we got, was at this point, I found some problems when I completed this procedure. I'd like to add a finding. Well, we gave you the quick add a finding, which then opens up a box below where you can put in the findings, just like you could from the findings tab in the previous version. So it defaults to the area for review that you were on, in this case, agent review and authorized delegates. You have to select a category, whether it's regulatory compliance, safety and soundness management, or IT. We're going to say this is a regulatory compliance issue. Let's say this is a recommendation. And these are not defined by SES. These are for your agency to define. So generally, violation is something we all agree on. But the other two, observation and recommendation, are for your agency to come up with terminology to define how you want to use these. Examiner can give it a description. Finding commentary if there's going to be commentary going in the report. And then you can add regulations or statutes. If necessary, you can upload a document to supplement the finding. So if the company produced a file that substantiated this finding, you could attach that here for reference. And you can indicate if the finding is resolved. And lastly, determine whether the finding will be included in the report or not. That just helps the EIC make sure all the findings, as they're flagged in the system, get carried forward to the report. So the enhancement really was to give you this screen or this set of functionality right on the bottom of a procedure so that you don't have to complete a procedure and then remember to add a finding later. I think this is a really good suggestion because I think what this will help us do is ensure that as procedures are being completed, examiners have the ability to kick off a finding right there, and there's no risk of of forgetting that that finding is outstanding. So I'm done with the procedures now. For now, when I close that, I get this message to close this tab. I'm going to go ahead and close it, and then brought back to my main SES screen. If I refresh this, I'll see hopefully a new finding in my grid here, and I do. This was number 1 before, now it's number 2. So I've got 2 findings in for the agent review and authorized delegates section, and it was a pretty slick process to add that finding. With that, I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint, and I'm going to hand off the presentation to Alejandra. Okay, in a minute, Alejandra is going to take over here and begin presenting, and I think she's going to carry the next few slides, which really represent a complete shift of gears. We're going to now begin talking about a policy matter that has functionality implications for SES, and that topic is document and data retention. Alejandra, take it away.
Thank you, Kyle. Good afternoon, everyone. With the Kansas release, we are implementing the provisions of the system's document and data retention policy, which was recently approved by the SRR board. Before we go over the functionality that we're going to show you that's coming with the Kansas release, we want to provide you with a brief background on the policy and to go over some of the policy's provisions so that you can get a better understanding of how the document retention indicator works in the system. So to start with the background, in the summer of last year, an agency working group was formed to develop a single policy for the governance of the retention and disposition schedule of the documents that are uploaded and transmitted in the system. The working group met for 2 months, and in that time frame drafted a policy. Once the policy was drafted, it was then presented to the NMLS Policy Committee for review. The committee was in agreement with the policy provisions in general and with the approach of the breakdown of the different data categories and document categories in the system. However, the committee was unable to reach a consensus on the actual time frame of the retention of the documents in SES. So they suggested that we open up a comment period for agencies to give all agencies a chance to provide feedback on the policy. So we did exactly that. At the end of last year, we opened up a 2-month comment period. At the close of that comment period, we received comments from 19 agencies. The majority of the agencies that submitted comments were in support of the policy and in favor of the retention schedules, which we will show you in a minute. Some agencies, however, did not feel comfortable with some of the policy provisions, specifically regarding what we call in the system data fields, and we will show you that in a minute as well. So before we get started and before we go over the policy provisions, we do want to remind everyone on the call that the policy has been approved by the SRR board, and so our focus on this webinar is to make sure that you get a good understanding of the policy's provisions and how we are applying that to the system, as opposed to spending too much time on the actual timeframes of the policy. On this next slide, we want to show you the different categories of data and documents in the system. So the way the information is broken down in the system is in 2 sections, documents, and then there's also data. Documents are anything that's uploaded to the system by SES users, whether it's an agency user or a company user. It's when a file is uploaded to the system, and it could be an Excel file, a Word file, and essentially anything that's connected to the supervisory activity that's uploaded to the system. Then there's data, and the data is what is generated automatically by the system. So when you're working in SES and everything that you see on your screen, that is considered data. And there's also the type of data that is generated by a user when they're typing information in the system. The documents in SES are subject to a retention schedule, which we will go over on this webinar. Data, on the other hand, for now is being retained indefinitely, and is not subject to a retention schedule. Up on your screen, you're going to see an example of what we mean by documents and what we mean by data. So as you can see, data is really everything that you can see on your screen. This is a snapshot of one of the tabs in the system. And, you see the business activities there, the areas for review. That's all automatically generated by the system, and that's considered data. And also, if you see at the bottom, data is also that field where users can type in information. So in this case, the examiner is sending back the information request because they feel that it's insufficient, the information that was provided by the company, and so they're typing in and saying just that, please modify your request. That's data. Now they're documents, and as we mentioned, documents is anything that is uploaded to the system. And on this screenshot of the system, you can see Upload Documents tab, and they're supporting documents that come with this. So that really is what we mean by documents. Now, we said that documents are part of the policy's data retention provisions. So there are two categories for documents for purposes of data retention, document retention. There's Category A, which is kept for 6 years, and Category B, which is kept for 90 days. Documents in Category A include all documents uploaded to the system by the regulator, all documents, and some documents uploaded by the company when they are uploaded to the system in connection to the response to the report of examination, a matter requiring attention, an investigation, or a complaint. That's Category A, 6 years. Category B, 90 days, are all other documents that are uploaded by the company that are not tied to that Category A, to those specific examples that we provided. So, for example, something that would fall under Category B is when all the documents that are uploaded to the system in response to an information request. When does the retention period begin to run? It begins to run on the date that the supervisory activity is closed in the system, or if there's an MRA connected to the supervisory activity, then when the MRA is closed. And as we mentioned, for data, currently there's no retention schedule, so it's retaining the system indefinitely. But that's the case for now, because if we go back to that agency comment period that we talked about, this is one of the areas, as I mentioned, where agencies felt uncomfortable in keeping data fields indefinitely in the system, because there are instances where these data fields might capture sensitive information such as CSI or PII. So this is the reason when the policy was sent to the board for approval, it was approved, but we had an action item to take back, and that is that we need to determine which data fields are going to be subject to our retention schedule, because we are going to be including retention fields, certain retention fields or data fields as part of the retention schedule. That's going to take a little bit of time to go over, because as you can imagine, there's hundreds of data fields in the system, and so we need to determine which ones are capturing sensitive information, and also the type of schedule, of retention schedule that they're going to be subject to. One important item to point out is that the policy states that these data fields, so if you go back to the slide, the data fields down here where you know, the user is typing in information, those data fields should not be capturing sensitive information. So if there's anything sensitive, whether it's, you know, related to essentially CSI or PII, that if it's a very sensitive topic, it should be attached to a document and transferred that way. So these fields should not be used to capture that type of information and to transmit that type of information. So with that, we provided that background and the information on the policy because, as we said, in the Kansas release, we are implementing the policy, and we are including the document retention indicators. So what I have up on my screen is a screenshot of the summary tab of a supervisory activity that has been closed. Once it's closed, then you get these two indicators at the bottom, and it tells you that Category A document, the deletion date, in this specific example is April 30th, and the system tells you that after this date, the documents will no longer be available. And then it goes into explaining what documents fall under Category A. And so with the Category B indicator, the same thing. It tells you that after July 29th, the documents will no longer be available. And so Category A, we have the 6-year retention time frame, and for Category B, we have the 90-day retention time frame. Some important things to keep in mind is that, as you know, the Kansas release is being deployed this weekend. However, because this is going to affect your supervisory activities, because in the system we have supervisory activities that go back all the way to when the pilot started in October. And so when this feature is implemented in the system, a lot of that information won't be available anymore in the system. So we're providing agencies with some time to go over their supervisory activities to determine if any of them are going to be deleted from the system based on the data retention feature. And so this specific feature, unlike all the other features in the Kansas release, will be implemented on May 15th. And it
does
Ali,
this is Kyle.
apply retroactive.
I just want to jump. Oh, sorry. I just want to jump in here quick and maybe just so folks kind of tune into this one particular piece. Sometimes a change of voice helps. Just know that if you have an exam in the system that's been closed for more than 90 days, this policy would be applied retroactively. So we're giving you an extra week of grace period to go in and do a bulk download, which Ali is going to be demonstrating here in the last 10 minutes of this webinar. So I just want to put an asterisk on this. We will also be emailing each EIC individually whose exams are more than 90 days old, just to make sure everybody has the ability to go in and do this bulk download. Sorry for interrupting, Ellie. I do want to just remind you that we've got only about 10 more minutes left of the webinar. Okay, thank you, Kyle. If you're in the system and you're reviewing and you want to download the system, most documents can be downloaded from the system. And now we're going to talk about something very closely related to the document retention feature in the system, and talk about a bulk download. So this bulk download is an enhancement with the Kansas release as well. And what it does is it allows certain agency users, in this case EIC, staff user, and the staff director, to download the documents associated to a specific supervisory activity. We up the limit of the information that can be downloaded to 50 gigabytes. And how this feature works is on a batch basis. So you make the request in the system. You would go to the Interactions tab. You go to that tab, and you'll see a bulk download button. Then once the request is initiated, SES is going to in turn
package all the documents, and then whoever made the request is going to get an email when the information is ready, and it's going to be packaged in a zip folder, which you will then be able to download. So with that, we are going to switch gears completely and talk about a new enhancement with the Kansas release, which is the library keyword search. We're going to be demoing this part of the presentation, and so I am going to go ahead and go into the system. And I am now in the system. I've already logged in as a California staff director. We're, again, of course, in the training environment. And if you have access to the library, what this feature does is, let me just go back. This is the home page. Right here, after you log in, this is what you see, the home page. And if you have access to the library, you're going to see this View and Manage Library function. So when you click on it, you see that you can search by library ID. That has always been in the system. What the enhancement is, and this is at the request of agencies, is it's a bit cumbersome to go through all of this information with just the library ID. Sometimes that would require maybe jotting down the ID number somewhere, and there's just a lot of information on these tabs inside the library. And so what our users requested was, hey, can we have a keyword search that, not only can we do a search by ID, but we can also just do a keyword search. And yes, absolutely, that made a lot of sense, and so we've implemented this change. And so once you are in the library, this keyword search applies to procedures, information requests, and references. So, for example, if I go to the information request tab, what you do is you go to the Show Filters section. And once you open that, then over here in the information request box is where you would type in a keyword. For example, if I put in marketing and you click search, then you get all of the marketing related items, information requests. And it's only 10 items. I mean, it's a great way to narrow down the information, because if I reset the information, you'll see that there's over 1,600 information requests. And you can do that both with, or you can also do that with the procedures, so the references. Great. Well, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kyle. And Kyle, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen so that you can take over again.
Great. Thanks a lot, Ali. Perfect. We have about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to go through the last two features here, share my desktop, and you should, in a minute, see the PowerPoint presentation. We're going to whip through the last couple features, no more demos, but I just want to highlight a couple more changes to the system so you're ready for them on Monday. The first is something you probably won't be able to miss, which is a new system notifications feature that'll arrive on your home pages. So this provides CSBS staff with the ability to put out announcements. They can be tailored to company users, agency users, or both, and they'll be visible on the user's homepage for a specified period of time. So we aren't sure exactly what we're going to be using this announcement feature for yet, but we envision it to be used to announce system outages, updates, changes to functionality, any offline periods, or anything else that we think would be important or newsworthy about the system. We're mentioning this to you because if you have thoughts on how we would want to use this functionality, we can customize it for company side, agency side. And so if you would have notifications that you think would be applicable for a system-wide announcement, let us know and we can discuss whether or not that's appropriate. As I mentioned, we added this feature. We don't envision using it often, but wanted to give you a heads up that it could be coming soon. The last couple slides here are just honorable mentions is what we're going to call these. And as we get to do more and more of these tutorials, I think we'll wrap up with some honorable mentions. These is kind of a laundry list of additional enhancements that we made that are coming with this release that we didn't have time to demo today. So one of them is the ability to go back and add more companies to your scheduling queue. When we worked with agencies who are scheduling exams in the system. They wanted the ability to kind of go back and add more companies to their shopping cart, if you will, or their queue before committing and making decisions about how to schedule those. So we've added that feature. We've added a set of enhancements to the policy user role. Again, policy users are just CSBS staff, and those enhancements allow CSBS staff to make certain requests and access certain information in the system with the approval of a state agency. We added the company coordinator role. So this is a pretty big enhancement, and I wish we could have demoed this today, but unfortunately we were not able to. The company coordinator role is a role that sits between the lead on an exam and the contributor on the exam. So it's kind of a middle tier level of authority. Really, this would be appropriate for large companies who have someone serving as kind of a coordinator capacity on behalf of the exam manager at that company, and can kind of like orchestrate and keep the trains running, if you will, on the exam. The last thing is we have some new notifications going out to companies at the outset of their subsequent or next exams, meaning the first exam that the company received in the system, they got their notification, but we realized on subsequent exams, as it could have been quite a while since that company's interacted with SES. So we've beefed up the notification on the outset of exams for companies. Once again, all release notes are available at csbs.org/about-SES. And I'm going to close with one final reminder that company onboarding is your duty as an agency. I'm mentioning this because this is an often forgotten thing, and many of you are going through your implementation process now. Remember, the first time a company is examined at SES, they must be onboarded. And that onboarding is really just a process led by you at the agency of associating a person to that company account. Company accounts come over from NMLS, but we don't bring user accounts over because the supervision practice at companies is sometimes different than the licensing practice. So the onboarding process in SES is something that the agency users have to do the first time a company is examined or otherwise supervised through SES. And it's a very simple one-time process where you associate the right person at that company to the company account in SES, and then that person in the company takes it from there. We have a resource packet available on the knowledge base regarding company onboarding, and if you need that information or you can't find the knowledge base, reach out to me or Allie after this, and we will definitely point you in the right direction. So that is everything we had today. I'm sorry we did not leave any time for questions, but we are available by email, phone. You can reach me at ktomas@csbs.org or Alejandro Krasno at akrasno@csbs.org, and we look forward to following up with you if you have any questions. Last but not least, remember the NMLS call center supports SES as well, and we encourage you or the companies that you're supervising to get questions answered from the call center as you can. Thank you very much for your time today, and I look forward to the next demo of the next release. Take care.